Another episode of the Joanna Whaley podcast. Quick announcement. Pride Month was wild. You all came out in droves to listen to this show. Get this number. Over 20,000 of you streamed this podcast in June of 2024. I'm just blown away and thankful. So thank you for listening. As I promised, I wasn't sure if I would keep a daily format of this podcast. We are going back to weekly because I know that I'm going back to school in September and I want to stay consistent with this show. But before we get started, if you're somebody who's LGBTQ or you're a parent of a queer child and you need spiritual support, you can go to patreon.com/Joanna Whaley for as little as $1.99 a month. I can basically become your online pastor. So go to patreon.com/Joanna Whaley. Today on the show, we're talking about Project 2025. On the other side of the music, let's start this awesome conversation. Here we go. Hey friends, welcome to another week of this show. I am beyond thankful for each and every one of you watching. And I have to be honest with you, the topic of today's podcast was not originally planned. I was going to start a whole 4-week message chat about queer joy, because I think it's important that after Pride Month, we talk about joy in the queer community continuing on. But there's been this uproar recently of a concept, of a theory out there that comes from more conservative circles that's been around for a while, but recently has really hit major news and has really become at the forefront of many people's consciousness. And it's Project 2025. We're talking about this idea of Project 2025. What is it? And we're going to really cover today on the show what this is, because you're seeing a lot of memes about it. You're seeing a lot of posts about it. And what is it? Because I think a lot of people have heard the term, but they only get their information from like a meme, okay? Which is not, if for those who are watching, not accurate information, okay? So, and there might be accurate information, but that's not probably the best way we should always be getting our information. But what I want to do before we dive in is tell you kind of some of my backstory and background of why this is something that matters to me. If you're new to my show, if you watch every week, you probably know this about me. But if you're just joining us, which many people do on live at TikTok, at Joanna Whaley Music, on Facebook. Today, YouTube crashed, so we aren't live on YouTube anymore today. But I was an evangelical pastor for 20 years of my life until I came out as a transgender woman. And I was I was in it. I was passionate about the church. Even at one point within that 20-year gap of time in my life, I actually planted a church. Like, I was the lead pastor of a church plant. And you can, I mean, everything, we turned over every leaf to start this church. And one of the biggest things we did was find a church planting network. What is a church planting network? If you're new to church planting in general, maybe you're from like a denomination where churches just kind of have always been there forever, or you have like this denominational support. Church planting networks are really popular in a lot of non-denominational circles because there's no supportive denomination to support the pastors, to help them, or to coach them in these processes of planting church. Because church planting is a nightmare. 0 out of 10 recommend. I've done it. It's not fun. But that's just me. You do you. Plant a church for all you want. But in this process, we looked at ARC church planting, which is one of the big names in church planting. And it really wasn't for us, but we ended up finding this church planting network in Florida. And this is going to start making a lot of sense now because of our topic and our subject matter, talking about Project 2025 and Christian nationalism. Florida is where our church planting network was. And so to paint the picture for you real quick, we walk into this church, beautiful church, but they put us in this tiny conference room. And in the room, it's real small. There's a small group of other pastors and their wives in the room. And there's bad coffee and styrofoam cups and Folgers. Okay, Folgers smells like corn. Okay, fight me. I know it. It smells like there's got to be corn in it. That's a whole topic for another day. But what was happening in this room is just kind of thrown together, and we're there, and they give us our kind of packet of the weekend. And then another thing to understand is that I'm there with my spouse at the time, and we had just had a child. Like we had a nursing child, and we're sitting in this room all weekend, and she's getting up and down nursing the baby, and I'm just trying to, pay attention, and we are swapping in and out. And then we just keep working through this conference with a kid, and we're juggling all of these things, and it's going on and on and on. But one of the things that they taught us in this church planting conference was this thing called the domains principle. Now you're wondering, what is domains? It's also got a different name called the Seven Mountains Mandate. It's all of the spheres of influence within the world. You've got government, you've got business, you've got education, you've got, all public works. You have all of these different areas. You have the church as part of a subgroup of these things. But it's all the different parts of society. And what we were taught in my church planting network was that Christians were not to create programs within their churches, but they were to send people into these domains and take them over and win them back to the Lord. This is what we were taught. We were taught the Seven Mountains Mandate, which strangely parallels to this new 900-page document from the Heritage Foundation called Project 2025. And as someone who studies, I'm somebody who studies Christian nationalism, this is something I've known about for a long time. A long time. Taraji Henson was on the BET Music Awards and mentioned that it mentioned Project 2025. She said something along the lines of you need to be bothered by this. I don't know the exact phrasing. I have to look at the actual what she said. But her commenting on Project 2025 immediately thrust this project that the Heritage Foundation is pushing and supporting into the mainstream. And then all of a sudden, it was overnight, all of my social media feeds, I don't know about you, but for me, it was every other person in my social media feed was talking about Project 2025. You see, the reality is that Christian nationalism wants the world to bow to its beliefs, to its biblical ideas, to its truth. I can recall so many times as a megachurch pastor, if you're just joining me, 20 years as a megachurch pastor. And I spent most of those 20 years believing that my version of Jesus was the right one, that it was the only one. In fact, I was in a seminary class this last, if you didn't know this, I'm a seminary student working towards my master's in theology, and and also a doctorate at some point. But I spoke up in one of my classes, and I said to one of my professors, I said, I'm having a hard time believing that we as Christians have the corner on truth and morality. That like our version is better than everyone else's. And I said, I think it's an arrogant idea that we think we're right. And I struggle with this. I mean, you get many people say like, well, the Bible says what it says, right? John 14:6, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Okay, so this is Jesus talking, but what we need to understand is that if you believe that forcing people into going towards one way is going to work, it's not going to work. It's going to repulse people. And Christianity will go through a reformation again. It will. If you force people to believe what you believe, especially by using governments to do it, it is a recipe for disaster. This has been done before. It has. The Crusades were a religiously motivated campaign. Government rules. Like between the 11th and 13th centuries that it were initiated by the Catholic Church. And these were expeditions aimed at recapturing the Holy Land from control of other religions and to defend Christianity and to expand Christianity's influence. And the Crusades have resulted in immense complexities that we see still today in our world. But Christianity was being forced on a generation. And look where it landed us. We don't look back at that time fondly. We really don't. And if you think that that was a great time in Christian history, I feel really sorry for you. I feel really, really sorry for you. So what do we do with this? Because I'm a queer person. I'm a queer person, and I also I'm a Christian. So what do we do here? What do we do? How do I navigate this as somebody who still holds faith in spirituality, but completely disagrees with what others in my faith system are doing right now, trying to use this faith system to force it down other people's throats? Don't we in the queer community get blamed all the time for forcing our ways onto others? Isn't parts of our society repulsed by the idea that you could be converted to be gay or trans? Aren't people upset about that? So what's different? First of all, that's not happening. But I'll tell you what is happening. Right now, governors are forcing schools to teach the Bible. They're forcing people to adhere to Christian rule. It is actually being shoved down some people's throats. And I call it what it is. It is the truth. It is the truth. And so we're going to come back in just a few minutes, but I want to dive into what are the details of Project 2025? I have them. Surprise. Spoiler alert. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of ideas here and thoughts and what this, what Project 2025 is and how it's going to impact the queer community if it comes to fruition. And recently, a political candidate, this might sound like a political show today, but this is actually like a spirituality. That's what I talk about. But a political candidate out there just said that they have no knowledge of this, even though it is one of the aims of a specific party. And we're going to talk about that today. We'll be right back. On the other side of this music, we're going to dive into some of the big details of Project 2025 and how we're going to navigate this as the queer community. We'll be right back after this short commercial.
And oh,
Hey friends, if you're like me, when I came out and navigating my queerness, there was a lot of spiritual questions and not many pastors that I trusted to ask the questions to. Well, on Patreon, patreon.com/Joanna Whaley, I've kind of become an online pastor for many LGBTQ people and parents of queer kids who are just asking questions about spirituality and queerness. For as little as $1.99 a month, you can join our Patreon community. And it goes all the way up to $9.99 a month with different features and bonus podcast content. You also can direct message me and free Zoom calls with me in an unlimited basis. Go to patreon.com/Joanna Whaley. That's patreon.com/Joanna Whaley. Join the community today. All right, friends, welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about some of the history and some context of where we've been. We're talking about Project 2025 today. We're talking about the impacts it's going to have on people that are LGBTQ. And I thought I should talk about this today because I am a queer Christian. And I deal in queer spirituality. And so I thought this would be important for us to discuss today. So we were talking about like where we've been. We talked about the Crusades and we've talked about forcing people into your religion and how it doesn't work and society's revolt against that. But what are the details? So what do we need to know as someone who's like myself, who's a queer person, about Project 2025? Well, one of the first kind of ideas, one of the things that, and I'm only really going to talk about things that affect queer people. There's 900 pages to this. So for me to like touch on everything would be absolutely impossible. This would be like a 10-hour podcast. We're not going to do that. I'm only going to speak into queer things and talk about it, how it's going to intersect with queerness and why the spiritual elements that are being forced through this are really damaging. And I'm a queer Christian and I'm a seminary student and these things matter to me. The first thing is like the repeal of non-discrimination protections. Project 2025 is seeking to overturn Bostock Clayton Supreme Court decision, which prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in employment. This could leave queer people vulnerable for being fired or denied jobs simply because of who they are. I have experienced this. Did you know that in all 50 states in the US, you can be fired from your job for being LGBTQ if you work for a religious nonprofit? I didn't know that. I thought, I'm covered by the law. But I lost my job as a pastor, a tenured pastor, a well-known pastor in my area. I was fired from my job, lost everything, lost my income, my home, my family, everything. And it all began to unfold from the moment I lost my job. From the moment I lost my job, simply because I told my employer that I was transgender and I was trying to figure it out and I was considering transition. I hadn't even come out yet. And I lost my job. And I looked through the Church of HR. I looked through the HR documents and I was looking and there was no carve out for sexual orientation or gender identity. This is what will become reality in Project 2025 is that for anyone, if I'm working I work a day job right now, right? I'll be working in a hospital as a chaplain. And I can't be fired from that job because of who I love or how I identify. because that is like a public, it's not a religious nonprofit. But if Project 2025 were to succeed, I could absolutely be fired from that job if my employer doesn't like the fact that I'm queer. The next one is a transgender military ban. This plan calls for reinstating the ban on transgender people serving openly in the military. The policy, it would be reversed. The decision by President Biden to allow trans people to serve in the military would be lifted, and it would exclude people from serving their country. I know many queer, LGBTQ, or trans military people. I literally had a military vet on the show last week for the 4th of July. Like my guest Fiona would not be able to serve, and she served her country faithfully as a queer person. All of the people that I work with who are in the queer community, who are also in the military, would lose their job. It would be dishonorably discharged. It's not right. The next one is there would be federal restrictions on transgender rights. Project 2025 aims to create federal limitations on trans rights, potentially mirroring some state-level restrictions on bathrooms, access, and participation in sports. Limited recognition of same-sex relationships. They would plan to restrict federal recognition of gay and lesbian or pansexual couples. This would impact so many families. This would not be helpful to the family. It would defund programs that promote LGBTQ inclusion. DEI would be on the chopping block. Curtailing healthcare access. I, as a queer person, as a transgender woman, may not be able to access my hormones under this plan. I've talked about this many times on the show, and it's a weird thought that I have because I own a home. I have a family here. I have children here. I don't talk about my kids much, but what I do say a lot is that it scares me that I have to think about, am I safer in another country? I've had to think about, if this happens, do I have to drive across the bridge to Canada to get my hormones? I live in Detroit. Do I have to go across the bridge to get hormones? I might have to. And I may not be able to have a doctor prescribe anything to me. A doctor may not be able to call me by my preferred pronouns. So then the idea of promoting religious objections would be elevated. That anyone could just say, you know what, like, you're not allowed to eat in my restaurant because you're trans. And that has happened to some of my friends before in America. But that would be covered. Excluding someone and kicking them out of your establishment because of who they are. There would be rollbacks in the government. Like, they would begin purging the government of LGBTQ people who serve in the government, which I know many people who want to serve, who serve in the government, and they would be kicked out of their job like they worked for a church. If somebody found out that they were a woman who was married to a woman or in love with a woman, they could lose their job over that. That's not right. This idea, this focus on traditional family, this 1950s Leave It to Beaver idea of family would be the only preferred idea of family promoted in public schools or anywhere else. Me as a parent, I wouldn't be recognized as a woman, or even divorce would be very hush-hush and very much, you could even lose your job. You could lose your job if you get divorced as a government employee if you have a Christian nationalist boss. There's going to be shifting legal landscapes. Like Project 2025 is seeking to influence the Department of Justice, which defends the rights of discrimination against queer people. And as we've seen, as signaled by the Supreme Court in the United States, we even have to think twice about, are we safe? Are our rights safe? So these are just some overarching things that directly affect queer people in the community in America. And if Project 2025 were to go down and were to happen, were to be pushed forward, if Heritage Foundation were to get a foothold in the White House through political leaders, these things would become reality. We've already seen the turnback of rights in our nation, but we're looking at it again. And so I'm not a political commentator. I'm a spiritual one. So I want to talk about some spiritual ramifications here. The idea of repeal to non-discrimination protections, I'm thinking right now about all of the people that are closeted in churches right now. And whether you want to believe it right now or not, Deacon Bob is gay. He might be. And I don't, and what could happen is if Deacon Bob, it comes out as gay in your church, you may have the religious right, which is BS, but you have the religious right to push Deacon Bob out of your church. But what if Deacon Bob works for a company owned by someone in the church? Now Deacon Bob is going to lose his job. Bob has no job. Like, these are the things that happen because of the religious ramifications here. And many people like to use the Bible, and they like to use Jesus as a means to discriminate. And listen, I've watched people who are trans in this world talking about like restricting transgender rights. I can speak for myself, but my transition actually helped my spiritual journey in ways I never expected. My spiritual journey is better than ever because of transition, because of healing. And because we have like a Bible verse that is way out of context, but just because you heard a pastor say that because of Deuteronomy 22, the trans people can't exist, that isn't a reason to say that they can't get their health care anymore. But a lot of this is coming from people who are proclaimed outward Christians, and they're saying, we want to return America back to a godly nation. When I was a young pastor, we had people saying all the time, we've lost our way. We were a Christian nation and we've lost our way. We've given up on Jesus. And I don't know, friends, the more I study Project 2025, the more I learn about it, the less Christian this nation's potential is sounding. So, what do we do? What do we do with this? You just need to keep sharing, keep raising the awareness. And in my opinion, not a political podcast, again, but a corpse in the Oval Office is better than Trump. Sorry. On the other side of the music, we're going to be digging into questions. We're going to take people's calls. I've got all kinds of clips. We're going to have ourselves a fun chat on the other side of this music. We'll be right back, friends, in just a few moments. Hey friends, can you do me a huge favor? Would you share, subscribe, rate, and comment on this podcast? Wherever you're listening to it, sharing it means the world. Commenting, rating means the world. I want this message to get to as many people that need to hear it as possible. That's one thing you can do. Another thing, did you know that all of the music on this podcast is my own? Yeah, I get copyright things all the time, but I have to tell all the streaming services it's my music. All you have to do is go to any streaming service and search my name, Joanna Whaley, and you can listen to every one of the songs you hear on this podcast. You can also support this show and get support by going to patreon.com/Joanna Whaley. I'm so happy you're here. Join a community, listen to a song, and share and rate this show. Thank you so much. All right, friends, welcome back to the podcast. Last month, the show would have been over, but now that we're back to a weekly format, we're going a little longer today. We're talking about Project 2025. We're talking about what it means for the queer community, what it means for people. Can we walk through this together? I had an interesting conversation with someone. I went on a conservative podcast with my friend Kevin Wilson. Great guy. Him and I became very good friends during this conversation. And I wanted to share with you a little clip of our conversation that we had together. I'm going to play it for you, and I want to talk about it. I want to get some reactions to it. So here's a little clip from the podcast I did with him.
He talks about, sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. Forever, O Lord, thy word is settled in heaven. I mean, I could just think about all of these things and the scriptures that talk about, he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Like he doesn't change. So God doesn't conform to culture. Culture has to conform to scripture. But
it doesn't. And when culture is being forced to conform to the Bible, that's when we see some of the most egregious things happening in our world. I mean, I'll tell you, I agree. I agree with myself, but that's the thing. We were talking about that. These ideas of saying that, culture has to conform to Scripture, and if you want to go find Kevin's podcast it's called Thinking Out Loud. He's a great guy, and him and I had this. If you want to learn how to have a conversation between a queer person and an evangelical Christian, go listen to that podcast. It's an hour, and there's 2 parts. There's another one coming next week. But we just had this great conversation about it. But, Scripture, society doesn't follow Scripture. And when it's forced to, that's when we have major issues. So yeah, we have somebody calling in here. We're going to chat and let's talk. Project 2024. Hi, friend. Okay, good talk. If you come on, be ready to talk with me. So we have all kinds of callers. Hi, friend. Welcome in.
Hello. How are you?
Good. What are your thoughts on this? Project 2025.
I think Project 2025 is literally the definition of dictatorship. Like, I was just hearing what people were saying, and I'm just like, how could anyone look at this and think that is a good idea? And I've even seen people make claims that Project 2025 is fake, which, to be honest, though, I really, really hope that I'm wrong, that
Me too.
Project 2025 is real.
You hope it's real.
It's like if so, yeah. I mean, I'm saying, Project 2025 is real, and someone's saying it's fake.
Yeah.
For the first time, I hope that I'm really wrong about that. But, I mean, it's like, even to just fake it, it's like, why go through all that effort, to
Right.
write up a 1,000-page document
Right.
and spread it on the internet like wildfire just for the sake of to fake it. Like, it just doesn't come together. It just doesn't work.
Exactly. And friends, so like you said, I hope it isn't real, but it is. If you go to Heritage Foundation, if you go to their website, you can actually access that document. And that's where I got all of this information from today. I got it directly from Heritage Foundation. And for anybody that listens to this show,
It's insane. Like, I just cannot believe that.
Yeah, well, it sounds like we lost you there, but Sarah, the connection was bad. But for anybody that watches or listens to this show after, like when it releases on all the other channels, like if you listen to it live at Joanna Whaley Music on TikTok or on Facebook, the audio quality is different because it's live, of course, but after this podcast is over, I will literally release the podcast everywhere and you'll get to hear. But in the show notes, you will see I put my references. I don't make this crap up. This is real. I put my references of where you can find the information at the bottom of all my show notes. So if you think it's fake, go to my show notes after the show and you will see Heritage Foundation. I'm actually pulling a lot of this stuff from conservative, Christian places. So yeah, it's definitely real. What are your thoughts, friends? If you're listening live at Joanna Whaley Music, join in the conversation. I'm going to play a clip that's going to rock the boat a little bit, especially for anyone who's an evangelical Christian and listens to my show. I went to Pride in Minneapolis, Minnesota. 2 weeks ago. And I had a conversation with the Satan Temple. Okay. Now, before you tell me I'm dead, I was really curious because they were right across the way from the Catholic organization. I'm going to play a clip for you from them, and I want to talk about it because I think it really plays into and touches on what we're talking about here today. Here it is.
And representation matters. In fact, you can't see because you're on tape here, but we are directly across from the Catholics this year.
Right, yeah.
So we believe in religious equality.
Yeah.
So if other groups are going to represent themselves, we're going to represent ourselves.
Yeah. Okay, so as I said, I will say it's the first time I've ever played a representative from the Satanic Temple on my podcast. But that conversation, she made some sense here. Religious representation matters. And if we're going to force society into, having the 10 Commandments on the wall, right? Like that is something we have to address. Like, my question is, like, would the same folks be okay with religious exemptions if it was from the Quran or if it was from other things? So what are your thoughts on this, friends? If our text messages, we had some technical glitches earlier today. Our text message system's down. So we are like, as you've seen this TikTok trend, we are raw dogging it today. I have clips from some things, but I also have, you can join us live at Joanna Whaley Music on TikTok, or if you have questions on Facebook and you're watching, put them in the comment chat. We have, and I see a lot of people saying 2025 is mostly fear-mongering. And as our last caller said, I kind of hope it is, but the thing is, though, go to heritagefoundation.com. Go to Heritage Foundation and read what they're saying. I mean, this stuff is out there for everyone to read. Hi, friend. Welcome in.
I have a question about Project 2025.
Yeah, what's your question?
So I don't really know much about it, but what is it? Because someone said it has something to do with LBT. I don't know how to pronounce it.
LGBTQ.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a fair question. I would encourage you to go to Heritage Foundation and read it or look it up. Just look it up anywhere. Project 2025 is really a Christian nationalist agenda to push very traditional values on all of society and force all of society to adhere to it. So me as a queer person, I would be forced, in a sense, to detransition because it's not preferred by the Christian nationalist idea.
I have a question, but like, would it be like everyone in the world who was a part of that, or no?
Would be America.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so this thing, like, I would definitely encourage you, go check it out, go read it, look it up. But this is some tough stuff. Like, and this is why we need to educate ourselves. This is why it's important to have this conversation, because there isn't a lot of education around it. Hi, friend, welcome in.
Hey, listen, Project 2025 is evil and must be destroyed.
How do we do it? How do we?
By voting blue.
Okay. Tell
that
me.
Seems to be our only alternative to it.
Yeah. And I share with you this idea of evil. I've talked about on this show, and I'll do a whole podcast about evil when we get closer to Halloween, of course, because it's Halloween. But what do you see as evil about it? I agree with you, but I want the listeners to hear what someone else thinks is evil about this type of idea.
No one has the right to use religion to take other people's rights just because you don't like it.
Amen. Yeah, I agree.
That's it.
Yeah. Walter, thank you for chiming in. He's right. Nobody has the right. Like, and this whole thing of separation of church and state right now, it's just ridiculous. I mean, here, I'm going to play a clip for you from Good Morning America. People are going to say, that's liberal media. You shouldn't listen to that. But listen to this clip real quick. This is about
If you're in a Louisiana public school classroom, they're going to be up on the wall. That, according to a new Louisiana law requiring the 10 Commandments to be displayed in every public classroom in the state from kindergarten all the way through state-funded universities by the start of 2025. The commandments must be on a poster-sized display with, quote, easily readable font and include a 4-paragraph context statement detailing how the 10 Commandments were, quote, a prominent part of American public education for almost 3 centuries, according to the legislation drafted by the Louisiana GOP.
I'm going to say this. It's not going to be popular. I don't care if the 10 Commandments was a historical thing that was used in our schools. There was a lot of other things that were tradition in America and taught to children back in the 20s or the 10s and the 1800s and the 50s that we would never, ever want taught in our schools today. Now, is the 10 Commandments the same as teaching kids about Jim Crow laws and telling them they're good? No, they're not the same thing. But what we have to do is understand that, like, just because it's something historical doesn't mean it needs to come back. It doesn't need to be put back in there, okay? And we are heading towards theocracy. Look how well theocracy has worked out in other places in the world. Look how well it's worked out. People don't like it. You should have the right. I should have the right as a queer Christian, as someone who shares this faith with the very people who push these ideas. I should have the right to say, I don't agree with this, and I'm going to live my life how I live it. Because transition healed me. Spiritually, physically, mentally, relationally, it healed me. Vote. This isn't a political podcast, but you got to frickin' vote. This matters. I want to thank you so much for joining the podcast. If you are somebody who watches this podcast live, stick around because we're going to keep recording. We always record bonus content after. You can hear that bonus content at patreon.com/Joanna Whaley. Thank you so much. We'll be back next week talking about this again in more detail. This is a production of Whaley Media. Thank you for being here, friends. We'll see you next time.